The very first episode of the Live Mindfully podcast was titled Mindfulness, What It Is and Isn't. Today's episode, we expand on that idea. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to Live Mindfully with Laurie Moore. Back in November of 2022, I recorded the very first episode of the Live Mindfully podcast. And if you haven't listened to that episode, I would recommend scrolling back so that you can understand the very basics of mindfulness. But very briefly, I used Headspace's definition of mindfulness because that was the one that most resonated with me. And please bear in mind, there are a lot of definitions out there that try to capture the essence of mindfulness, and some of them I will debunk today. Some of them, the definitions and theories aren't clear to me. They don't really explain mindfulness in a way that I think as a standalone definition makes much sense. And what's interesting in doing the research for this episode, I have realized that Headspace have redefined what mindfulness is. So Headspace says now that mindfulness is the idea of learning how to be fully present and engaged in the moment, aware of your thoughts and feelings without distraction or judgment. Originally, it said mindfulness is the quality of being present and fully engaged with whatever we're doing in the moment. So much of a muchness, really. But their new definition expands on the original definition a little bit. And in episode 1, I also gave 4 ways to practice mindfulness, including limit distractions, reflect, be organized, and set realistic expectations. So now I want to expand on some of the misconceptions that exist about mindfulness. So I do often hear and read, mindfulness is the act of always being calm. And I want to debunk that. Mindfulness is not always the act of being calm. Mindfulness does not mean that you walk through this earth in this serene, non-competitive, very, accepting of everything that comes your way state. Mindfulness is more about you acknowledging these states as they arise and noticing them without judging yourself. Me personally, I am a very competitive person. I like to do things really well. I strive to always honor the very best features of myself and accept and love the very worst. I work at being a respectful and kind person who communicates her boundaries and feelings as best I can in the moment. I'm very aware of how I parent. I'm conscious of how I eat, and I pay attention to when I'm hanging the washing on the line. We live in a fast-paced modern world though, so quite often I am multitasking. Sometimes I do eat McDonald's. I absolutely love a Big Mac. I love a Big Mac. They are delicious. But I am conscious to not multitask in everything that I do. I take time every day to meditate or be still or walk in my garden and notice the things around me. Most days, I eat organic fresh foods. Most days, I cook or prepare all of my meals. Most days, I drink water and limit caffeine and soft drink. But it doesn't mean that I don't do those things. When I am playing a competitive sport or working in a competitive space, I am not okay handing over the win to someone else just because I'm mindful. Quite the opposite. I want to win, but I want to win fairly and because on the day I was the best at it. And if not, I am a gracious loser. Or at least I try to be. And if I'm not a gracious loser, I spend some time reflecting on that. As I parent, I get upset. And don't get me wrong, My children have taught me exponentially the power of patience. Woo! But eventually, my two will press my buttons long enough for me to lose my cool. And while I am losing my cool, and I have two little faces staring back at me in complete disbelief, because that's what they do. They look at me like they cannot believe I'm upset right now. Like, why are you getting so mad? I'm very conscious of what I'm doing, and I'm very conscious of what I'm feeling in that moment. I don't allow the anger to override the entire situation. I'm still angry, but I remind myself to feel my feelings. I might say, feel your feelings, Laurie. Feel the heat in the body. Feel the rage. Feel the desire to scream. Feel the power of energy surging through you right now. And I remind myself that I am angry and that that's okay. But I'm also reminding myself it's not okay to name call. I'm not allowed to belittle them. I'm not allowed to scream. And I'm not allowed to smack. And I'm certainly not allowed to use my bigness against them. Because when we are angry, especially at children, it is so easy to do that. And I also want to say that if you have done that, or that is something that you are working on, that is okay too. I have done it. And I have to catch myself sometimes in it. Mindfulness is not necessarily the act of stopping that. Mindfulness is the act of recognizing that you are doing it. And if it is something you want to change or stop, then you must reflect on why you're doing it. Perhaps it was something that was done to you when you were a child. Maybe it's recognizing that it just feels good to get the rage out. I often find, though, that when I am angry with my kids, I am usually directing my anger to the wrong people. I'm usually not actually upset with them. I'm probably more upset about other things, but they are there and they have done something that is impeding me to do something else that I want to do in that moment. And in that moment, I am too angry to reflect. And that's why I reflect later. So I will explain to them in as even a tone as I can. But believe me, it is an authoritative even tone that right now I'm feeling pushed to the edge and angry, and that I need some time alone to process how I feel, and I explain why I feel angry. So I might say something like, this is the third time I have asked you to not interrupt me while I'm in the middle of something. I have politely explained to you that I need 5 minutes, and you are disrespecting and ignoring my request, and that is not okay. And then I might say, this is the final time I'm going to explain that I am busy, and if you interrupt me again, there will be a consequence because you are not listening to me. And the consequence might be the loss of device time or treat time. Sometimes I don't even give a consequence because I can't actually think of an appropriate one. So I just let the anticipation of what it might be linger in the air. And let me tell you, that's quite an effective tool. So being mindful doesn't mean that you allow negative things to happen to you and you don't say anything. Being mindful simply means that you are aware, you're engaged in the present moment and happy to address things as they arise. For example, the other day I had 2 women step in front of me while I was waiting in line at the markets, and I politely said, excuse me, but the line starts back there. I wasn't rude. I gave them the generous assumption that they were simply not paying attention. I didn't assume malice and then stand behind them huffing and puffing like they were rude a-holes. And my generous assumption was right. They couldn't have been more apologetic. They tried to explain themselves. They said, look, sorry, we weren't watching. We're too busy talking. We're so sorry. And no harm, no foul. They went to the back of the line a little embarrassed. And I could have also decided to let it go. But here's the difference. And I say this to my daughter all the time. If you are upset about something, say something. People are not mind readers. If you're happy to let something go, make sure you are actually letting it go. If you're not happy to let something go, say something with kindness and a generous assumption. All too often, I think we walk through our day thinking that the whole world woke up with the sole intention of getting in our way, of stepping on our toes, of taking what is rightfully ours. And this is the craziest assumption we could make, because did you wake up today with the sole intention of upsetting as many people as you possibly could? No, you didn't. You just want to get where you need to go and do what you need to do and be as happy as you can in the process. We don't wake up hoping to leave a negative mark on people around us. And if we operate with a little more mindfulness, if we learn how to be fully present and engaged in the moment, aware of our thoughts and feelings, and we limit our distractions and judgments, we'll find that living mindfully isn't that hard to do. And that mindfulness doesn't require us to change who we are or how we behave. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Mindfulness requires us to lean into who we are and to love all parts of that. Mindfulness encourages us to be more active in our lives and relationships. Mindfulness calls on us and encourages us to live a life as fully and with as much awareness as we can muster. Mindfulness isn't operating from a calm, serene place. It isn't accepting whatever befalls. Mindfulness isn't asking you to take a step back, but rather a very conscious step forward. And maybe as you practice mindfulness, you will naturally become a little calmer. Or maybe you won't be as bothered about the little things. But this must be an organic byproduct of mindfulness and not the reason why we practice it. The reason why we practice mindfulness is so that we can be the main character in our lives, so that we can live our lives with greater enthusiasm, be more confident, and do so from a mostly, not always, a mostly relaxed state. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you haven't, head back to episode 1 and receive advice on mindfulness practices that you can integrate easily into your daily life. And if you haven't already, I would be most grateful if you left a star rating for this podcast. Every rating helps the podcast grow and reach more people. Have a great rest of the day, and until next week, take good care of yourself.